I want to show some of my Detroit boys a little bit of love here. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video, because today I wanted to bring up Moritz Seider. Now, Seider is in my field of attention because there are a lot of things that have gone on with Moritz Seider over the past year that paint a really good picture of a prospect profile today that the Detroit Red Wings took at the 6th overall spot in 2019. Now, let's go over that a little bit first, because when Moritz Seider was drafted 6th overall in the 2019 NHL entry draft, there were many strong opinions about that from the moment the pick was announced. Immediately, Red Wings fans at the watch party, there was a video of that circulating online. A lot of them were really surprised, and rightfully so. Moritz Seider was a guy that most people had projected as probably a 12 to 19 range pick. Nobody really had him in the top 10, and seeing him get taken 6th overall was a huge shock to not only Detroit fans, but NHL fans as a whole. Seider was taken before guys like Dylan Cousins, who was being hyped up all year as a potential 3rd overall candidate. Trevor Zegras wasn't taken then either. Nor was Matthew Boldy or even other defensemen on the board like Philip Broberg, Victor Soderstrom, or Cam York. Seider was a guy that not too many people thought had any realistic chance of getting drafted in the top 10, but then the reports started coming out, hey, Edmonton was thinking about taking Seider, but they went with Broberg instead because Seider wasn't there. Reports started coming out, and all of a sudden people are taking a look at Seider like, okay, what do we have here? Is this a 6th overall caliber player? Well, let's talk about that a little bit here right now. When Seider was drafted in 2019, he was drafted out of the Adler Mannheim in the DEL, which is a pro hockey team playing in the top German hockey league. Seider in that year wasn't necessarily super impressive on the score sheet because in the Adler Mannheim season, he only had 6 points in 29 games. That's not amazing, but the fact of the matter is, he was playing pro hockey. He was playing in the #1 league in Germany, and he was playing as a 17 turning 18-year-old there against men. Now, there's a little bit of a tangent that we have to go on here when we're talking about Seider and talking about how he played in Germany. Because if you watched Moritz Seider play in the German leagues, which I did because I was watching him and tracking his progress throughout the year, you can see it. He's a big 6'4" right-handed guy, 207 pounds. He's hard to get around, and he's got some really smooth skating, so he was a really good defensively sound guy. In his own zone, he would make the right plays, he would make the right breakout pass. His pass is really good, and he was able to utilize that very efficiently throughout the season. But the big question mark about Moritz Seider came in the offensive zone. Because every time I saw Seider in the O-zone, he wouldn't really do anything. He'd just stand there at the corner. He'd stand there at the blue line, and he'd wait for the play to turn over, and then he'd start skating backwards and go on the back check. The guy wasn't necessarily involved all too often offensively. Now that's weird. It's really weird because if you take a look at everything Seider did before he was playing in the German league, the DEL, take a look at this. He was a point per game with Mannheim's U19 team. Throughout the U19 team, when he was a 16-year-old, he was at half a point a game. In the U16 leagues, he was over a point per game some years, at a point per game other years. The guy was always an offensive threat. But by the time he got up to the top league, he really didn't show that anymore. And then the reports started to come out, the little trackings of what went on in Germany started to present itself in the media, and we learned that playing in Germany's top league, Moritz Seider was developed, acclimated, and trained as a really sound, defensively reliable option. They put the training wheels on Seider, quote unquote. They didn't want him focusing on the offense as much as he did in the past. It's a pro hockey league in Germany. They have scorers. They have players who can contribute offensively. Their mindset that they instilled into Seider back then was that this guy needs to improve and this guy needs to develop in a defensively sound game. Which is why he didn't get the points. It's why he played the way he did, and it's why he ended off with the numbers that he did. These numbers were enough to get him to 6th overall, but you could argue it's not even really the numbers, it's everything else that Seider has. Seider has always been seen by people as a player who has a much higher ceiling than what he's currently hinting towards throughout the games that he played in Germany. And now, with the AHL's Grand Rapids Griffins, the Detroit Red Wings AHL affiliate farm team, he's showing that off. He's at 11 points in 21 games right now. And he actually had a really down, pointless drought. And that was throughout the first 7 games of the year. He actually had a point in the first game of the season, but then he went pointless for a while. Overall, Moritz Seider has 10 points in his last 14 games, and he went pointless in the previous 2 games. So there was actually a span where if you take away the 2 most previous games played by the Griffins, Seider was at 10 points in 12 games, and that's certainly a really, really good number for a guy who's only 18, who's a rookie defenseman in the pro hockey leagues of the AHL. Does that mean that his ceiling is any much higher than people thought it was last year? Hey, maybe. But Seider, to me, has always been a player who has had the talent, but his draft year last year was a year where they didn't really want him to show the offensive flair all too much. And now if you take a look at it, take a look at the guys who were drafted after Moritz Seider, and you take a look at the comparables. What's Dylan Cousins doing right now? He's in the WHL. What are Soderstrom and Broberg doing right now? Well, they're defensemen in Sweden. What's Podkolzin doing right now? Well, he's barely fighting for ice time in Russia. Moritz Seider is a guy who's 18 and who has taken a much stronger path to getting to the NHL than a lot of the guys that were drafted immediately after him. Now again, I'm not saying that Seider was the better pick here, but what I am trying to say is that maybe the Seider pick was more justifiable than people thought it was at the time. And that's being exhibited by his play on the ice. It's being exhibited by how he blends in and how he meshes and how he belongs in the AHL. You can't say that about too many 19, 18-year-old players who are fresh out of Europe and who are just brand new to North American ice. A lot of people were concerned about Moritz Seider and how he would be able to transition from the European ice into the AHL, but he's done that really well. And in fact, if you ask Detroit Red Wings fans, he actually looked really, really gosh darn good in the preseason too. A lot of Red Wings fans, if you ask them on Twitter, on Reddit, etc., the ones who watched Seider in the preseason will tell you that he looked like he honestly could have played in the NHL. And that's not saying that he will play in the NHL this year. That's just me saying that if he was thrown into the NHL today, I don't think he'd succumb under the pressure. I don't think he'd make too many mistakes. I don't think he would be obviously the youngest player on the team. I think he would honestly be okay. And I think he would actually have a shot of competing and being in the game. So that in itself is just a testament to how mature Moritz Seider plays the game. We knew he had that offensive flair to him because he exhibited that throughout his entire junior German career. But the defensively sound side of his game and the reliability is something that was recently instilled, and something that they put such an emphasis on last year that I think it's really going to pay off sooner rather than later. Sure, does Philip Broberg have a higher offensive ceiling than Seider? Hell yeah, he does. We've seen the skills from that guy. But is Philip Broberg a much more guaranteed player to make the league than Seider? Hell no. In my opinion, Seider was always going to be an NHL player, and he always had that frame. But now, his development in Grand Rapids is really showing us that that offensive production still does exist within this player. And now, taking a look at things, you could argue that Seider was not the second best defender in the draft, but he was the second highest drafted defender, behind Bowen Byram. But today, I think we can take a look at all of this and say Seider honestly has been really impressive, and he's been improving a ton. If you watch the Griffins games, that a 6th overall pick doesn't necessarily sound too bad anymore, doesn't it? Red Wings fans embraced the heck out of this guy like 3 minutes after he was drafted. I say 3 minutes and not immediately after, because immediately after, it didn't necessarily look like Red Wings fans were too happy, but they warmed up to him real quick. He's a tough guy. He's a good personality. He's a nice, strong, confident frame out there, and he's doing a really, really good job transitioning into the AHL. Moritz Seider, he's better than I thought, and he's really gosh darn good. Hope you enjoyed this video. 99, and bye.